Hey there, and welcome to exercise number 66. In this one, we need to write a function named fetchBranchNames that receives two parameters. The first one is the username of a GitHub user, and the second one is the name of a public repository owned by the user above. The function should return a promise that resolves to an array with the names of all branches in that repository. Now, if the username or repo doesn't exist, the return promise should resolve to an empty array. And I added a short note below saying that here's the link to the GitHub API, and it's your job, and in this case, my job, to find the correct endpoint to call, how to call it, and so on. Below we have an example. So if the username of the GitHub user is this one, and this is the repo, then those are all the branches in this repo, right? So I added here 9 branches and then another 106, which I'm not going to put here because, it's going to be too long and those might change in the future, but you get the idea, right? We want the names of all branches in that repo. If you want to solve this exercise for yourself, which I highly encourage you to do, then click on the link in the description. If not, keep watching and we're going to solve it together. If you've been following our progress so far, then you might realize this is not the first exercise of this type. Actually, we've had 2 previous exercises that required us to use the GitHub API, right? So if I go here in the sidebar, we're currently at number 66. And if I go at 65, this is also one that requires the GitHub API. And then further above at number 60, we have another one which requires the GitHub API. And they're all kind of similar, right? The idea is for you to practice fetching a public API and handling the response and so on. So because of this, I'm not going to write all the code from zero like I did the previous parts, because a lot of the code is duplicated, right? So we're going to go through the solution conceptually, and then we're going to copy paste some parts from previous exercises. And if you didn't solve those exercises, then I encourage you to go back, solve them, and then this one is going to make a lot more sense. So first, let's go here back to our exercise number 66. So we have here the exercise. Let's go on this link. And actually, you know what? Let's go back and let's do command click. So here we are on the link, and can we change it to maybe, okay, whatever. We're going to leave it to white theme. So I want the name of all of all branches in a public repository. So let's find this API. So I'm going to go here on the left side and let's see. I'm going to guess it's in repositories. Repositories. And then let's do here branches. Branches. Is it this one? Yeah, this is the one. Okay, so I found it here on the left side. So list branches from a repo, and I think I can use this API. So let's test it. So I'm going to go here and let me just copy it, and I'm going to take the username from here. And let's do this, and I'm going to take the repo from here. And let's just can I do command click? Okay, it works actually. Okay, so those are the branches. So you can see we get how many. Let's do collapse all. So I get 30 branches, but actually, if we look here in the response, I see we have like 106 more. So the idea is that the GitHub API is paginated. So if we go here, I'm going to search for pages using pagination in REST API. And again, this is just a small parenthesis. If this is the first exercise of this kind you're watching, go back to the previous one. I'm going to explain in much more detail how everything works. But here, because there's a lot of copy paste, we're not going to do that. We're just going to solve it. So coming back, the idea is that the GitHub API is paginated, and we have a per page and a page query params when we call an API. So for example, I could say here, let's say per page is 10, and we should get 10. And then I should be able to say and page equal 10. And then I get like the 10 page of 10. So I hope that makes sense. Now, how do we use those pages? Well, we have here some more documentation, and the idea is that GitHub returns us in a very special link header information about the next page and the previous page. So based on that, we can figure out how many pages we need to fetch and so on. So now that I explained this, and I hope it's clear, let's go back to the previous exercise and let's copy some code. And I want to copy this code actually. Right? Extract next page, because we're going to need this one exactly. So I'm going to put it here. So this is a function. Let me collapse it. So this is a function that, given a link header, right, does all the magic required. So splits it, splits the strings, finds the next page and so on according to the documentation, which is in this page. So does all of that and then returns us a number or null if there's no next page. So I'm just going to copy this from the previous exercise. Now let's create another function, which I'm also kind of going to copy, and I call this intelligent copy paste. So let's go back here. And actually, let me take this function, right? Fetch page of closed pull requests. So I needed that for the previous exercise. Here I'm going to rename it. So I'm going to say fetch page of branches. I get the same parameters, but here we're going to do branches, right? Branches, and there's no state. We just care about the branches, so no state, but we care about this. So the page and the per page. Now, before moving on, let's just look at this function a little bit. I know I copy-pasted it really fast. So we're doing a fetch request, so a get request here to this API. We have a few parameters, so we say, hey, I want to get the branches from this repo of this user. This is the page I want, and this is how many I want per page. Then if I get 404, maybe the user or the repo doesn't exist, then I'm going to return here what? Branch names is an empty string and there's no next page. Otherwise, I'm going to convert it to JSON and I want to return branch names, and here we need to look at the response per page commits. Oh, this is the name. I was looking, funny, I guess I'm a little bit tired. So I was looking at it, I was like, where is the name? Okay, so here's the name, right? Now what I want to do, so we get an array of objects. So what I want to do is JSON response.map, and here this one I'm going to rename to branch. It's going to be branch.name. And then the next page is going to be the result of calling this function. So we're going to look whether or not we have a link header. We're going to say, okay, if we have one, I want to extract the next page from it and return it as well. So now that we have this, we can kind of test it, right? So let me just go here and I'm going to say fetch page of branches. And let me just take this from here, take this from here, and I'm going to say page 1 per page 30. And then I'm going to say .then, I'm going to say response, and let's do a console log resp. And we should see an object, right, with branch names and with the next page too, which is perfect. So we have this function which works. That fetches, actually, let me just not delete it, let me just comment it. So we have a function that fetches a certain page and gives us the branch names and gives us the next page, the number of the next page. Then we have this function that's used by the previous one to extract the next page. So all we have to do is actually call those. So I'm going to say let current page is 0. And I'm going to do it in a while. We can do it a little bit different too, but for the purpose of this exercise, a while is good enough. So I'm going to start from page not 0, actually page 1. And again, how do I know we start from page 1? Well, I'm going to go here using pagination and actually not here in the REST API, and we can see it defaults to page 1. So it starts from 1, the page. So current page is 1, and I'm going to say while current page is different than null, and actually I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do next page, right? So while we have a next page, we're going to call the API. Now I'm going to call the API, but I also want to keep the names of the branches I have found so far. So I'm going to say let branch names is an empty array. Now here we're going to do return branch names, right? So this is what's going to happen at the end. And here we're going to fetch this page, and then we're going to reassign the variable. So I'm going to do something like this. Const, and let's see how they're called, branch names, and next page is, or actually let's do it resp. We can do it like this, is await fetch page of branches of username, repo, and then I get next page, and per page how many we want. Well, let's say we want 100. Why 100? Because 100 is the maximum value allowed. And we can see it here in using, actually not here, using per page, the number of results per page, maximum 100. So I want to use the biggest number because I want to make as few requests as possible. So we're going to do this, and I'm going to say next page is resp.nextPage, right? And again, if this is null, then we're going to stop at the next iteration because we reached the end. And then I'm going to say branchNames.push, and then I'm going to do resp.branchNames. So I'm going to append the branch names of this page to the ones I found so far. And finally, I'm going to return the result. Now, this makes sense. So let's actually test it. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to do fetch branch names of this. And you can see we get 116, which is exactly how many we want. Now let's see that if I put a username that doesn't exist, we should get an empty array. So that's correct. Now let me just comment this one here. Let's test our solution, and voila, it works. Now, before I close the video, I know I went a little bit fast in this exercise. And again, maybe if this is your first exercise, it's going to be a little bit confusing. That's why I highly recommend watching the previous one, so number 65. They are very similar, and in that one I go into more details and I write all the functions line by line. Here we did a lot of copy-paste because, well, it's kind of the same idea. Now, this being said, I'm going to go record another exercise, so see you in the next one, and happy coding!